film from the garbage and now has an archive of his own and runs a film series based on film he took out of the garbage. And it's astonishing. They just didn't think it was going to be worth anything. And I'm talking about like classic Jackson 5 and all kinds of stuff all through the years. It's amazing. So if you have stuff, post it. Let people share it because it brings so much joy to people to see this stuff. And especially with Ed gone and no more music coming and no real archival stuff coming out, we have to do this. Right, Dave?
Yes, we do. Absolutely. And that's not the first time I've heard the story of people picking stuff out of the garbage.
Oh, yeah.
That otherwise would have been destroyed. I mean, the same thing like in the comic book industry. I mean, I've read stories about people like taking art out of dumpsters that the comic book company was just going to throw away. So it's just amazing.
Yeah.
I was going to say this show in particular, this is a great show. I think this was the show opener of the 1979 tour. The audio of that has been out on bootleg for years.
Right.
And some of the video that we've seen has leaked out before. It seems like it comes and goes, but they're really making an effort to clean it up. And, I don't know when it's going to be, I don't want to say officially released, but
right. When it's going to drop
for everyone to see. But It is great stuff and just a joy to behold because getting any kind of video from Van Halen back in the late 70s period, I mean, that's tough. You think audio is tough. Video is even tougher.
Absolutely.
And again, it just amazes me how, like, none of this stuff was professionally filmed or we haven't seen anything like. Just baffling.
You have to realize the time. They didn't think about this stuff. It wasn't even like a consideration. You got to remember there was no computers. There was no MTV or cable. Like, they're like, what are we going to do with it? What are we going to do with it?
I get it. But it seems like other bands.
Yeah.
Have
right.
stuff,
Well, that's
and
true.
The same caliber of Van Halen, or even less.
Right.
So how did they have all this stuff?
I know.
This band does come on, come on now.
I know. I always joke around. You can go back and dig out old shows from Uriah Heep, but we can't get anything from Van Halen.
Right. Exactly. Anyway.
Yes. Moving on. We have David Lee Roth drops another song, Giddy Up. Here's a clip.
She ran the bar at the Cheating Art Cafe. Yes, I was a criminal. Crime didn't pay. Can't remember. Sometimes good guys don't wear white. I will be your long, tall dancing tonight. Straight down the highway as fast as you can go. Last of the finishing riders. We rode and rode. We still riding.
Well, wow, I tell you, another song from the Mysterious California Sessions album. This is sort of a mid-tempo, scenic kind of song. Acoustic, of course. The whole album is supposedly acoustic-based. It's really kind of based on Roth's kind of talk vocals. It sounds, believe it or not, in my opinion, like an outtake from Your Filthy Little Mouth. It sounds right in that vein. About 2 minutes and 32 seconds in, you got the soft-spoken breakdown with Roth doing his low, sexy voice. It's all good. It's all fun. It's not something you crank or get off on. It's a pleasant, light, fun. There's not much to it. Personally, I think Somewhere Over the Rainbow Bar and Grill was better. Still, this album seems to be taking its time coming out, but should be enjoyable when it comes out. What do you think, Dave?
I think you're right. It's a good song. It's not a great song.
Right.
It's a decent song.
Yeah.
You're not the only person who's compared it to a Filthy Little Mouth outtake either, by the way. I just wish he would release the whole thing as an album already, but I don't think he's going to do that, and we can get to that later when we talk about Dave's appearance with Joe Rogan and a comment he made there. But, I'm glad Dave's releasing music. We've all been waiting for the John 5 songs to come out completely. So, bring it on, Dave. If you want to release them one at a time over the next few months, go right ahead. We're ready.
Well, speaking of what you just said, Dave, the Joe Rogan podcast, wow. Okay, so we're going to take this right from the top here. So Dave was on for 3 hours with Joe Rogan, which is a lot of Dave. And that's a lot of Dave for our Dave Marconi, because he probably suffered his way through that. But Dave is high as a kite.
That's a good way of describing it, by the way.
Dave is high as a kite in this thing, and he's sort of like that anyway in real life, but he's smoking cigars and he's talking about tattoos and beef and martial arts and his strict parents and replacing Howard Stern and his surgeries and laughing up a storm and riding his bike and all these different things. Rogan seems so baffled by the whole damn thing the entire time. He's like amused and surprised. I have to say, Roth flew to Texas, which is where Joe Rogan is. Joe's not in L.A. anymore. He's in Texas. So Roth was in studio, and he had to fly all the way to Texas just to do this. So this was totally crazy. I'm just going to highlight a few things that I thought were more pertinent to what we do here. I mean, it was so crazy, so long. And if you love Dave, it's fun. And look, he's interesting and funny and crazy, and it is a wild ride. For sure. He's always fun to listen to. But the shocker of the whole thing is there was no discussion of Eddie's passing whatsoever. I literally don't even know what to say. Unless there was some sort of stipulation that it was not to be discussed. But
it had to be.
Yeah, but here's the weird part, Dave. His constant reference to Alex throughout the whole thing was shocking.
Yeah. And no, I don't think he said Ed's name once.
He did. No, he did. He did say Ed's name once. I'll tell you how he did it. This is the weird part. Okay, so Ed's name comes up. The way he talked about it was he says he took Ed to his first black concert. He took Ed to go see Earth, Wind, and Fire.
Oh, that's right.
He said that. I took Eddie Van Halen to his first black concert at the LA Forum, Earth, Wind, and Fire in 1976. And that is the only time he mentioned Eddie. Now, the weird part about this thing, his constant referencing to Alex. I mean, he goes, I know Alex is listening to this about 3 times, number one. And then he says, Alex and I, we were talking about this the other day. And he talked about it, he's saying, Van Halen, we played 5 45-minute sets a night, sometimes 9 nights in a row. Al, I know you're listening to this and laughing. And he just goes on and on and on about Alex. And then he goes, Al and I laugh like pirates on the phone. And he keeps referencing Alex like they're best buds. And they talk all the time, which is weird. Back in the day, when Van Halen was in full Van Halen mode, Alex and Dave used to hang. I do have to say that because Alex used to get into crazy shit like Dave, and Eddie and Mike were more the quiet ones. Like Mike would have his drink and go off to the side, and Eddie would be like in his bedroom like noodling around on his guitar. But Alex and Dave used to get into some shit because Alex is nuts and so is Dave. But Joe noted this. This was sort of funny. Joe said, David Lee Roth has no phone. David Lee Roth has no email. If you want to reach David Lee Roth, you have to talk to his handler. He said this right to the screen. And Dave cackled away throughout this whole thing, which was really crazy. He said, well, you like doing this? He goes, I enjoy folks. I enjoy entertaining folks. I enjoy learning from folks. And then, you know, he just kept talking about, like, losing his tooth. He said, Alex and I are in our 50th year. He said, we started playing 3 weeks after high school graduation. Then he talked about the Van Halen brothers having a job set up for them at the airport, that he was tossed out by his mother halfway through high school. This is Dave talking about him. He's calling himself a troublesome kid. That the Van Halens went to Pasadena High School, which was more like Ridgemont High. And Dave went to the more Hispanic and black school, which was more like Cooley High. And that's how he got his nickname, Diamond Dave. He also, like I said, he mentioned that he took Eddie to his first black concert, Earth, Wind, and Fire in 1976. And he also said, I could gang sign the alphabet by the 7th grade. Talked about Alex and him suing a Catholic school in 1973 for not paying them, I think, $150 for a gig, claiming they were smoking marijuana, but they weren't. And he said the only reason they weren't is because they couldn't, because they didn't have enough money to, but they would have otherwise. And they also said that when they put up a picture of himself from back in the day on the screen, he says, I used to look like Tarzan who read a few paperbacks. You could sharpen a honey knife on my cheekbones. I was gorgeous. That was 1,000 hips ago, he said. But he said, I'm not a sex symbol. I symbolize it when you feel sexy. I'm the MC. I make people feel sexy. You listen to Van Halen music, you're going to feel young, skinny, invincible, and your old lady will feel eminently desirable. He talked about his years as an EMT and how he would just run around and like make coffee for the EMTs and no one would recognize him. He said he was never, ever, ever recognized when he was working 4.5 years as an EMT in New York City, and they used to call him D-Row. That was his nickname. When they asked him about smoking, he said he smokes every 2 days. He said, if anything catches up to me, it'll be the Marlboro Man. And he said that all of his heroes worked in a smoke-filled environment, and that it was all part of, the creativity. But he says, to me, the world's a stage, and I appreciate some better lighting. So he had all these Dave quotes that he was dropping. Another one was another famous one. My body is a temple, but I rent it out for parties. He said he
was on a roll. When he said nobody recognized him, I could have sworn he said he did get recognized once or twice.
I thought he said that in another interview, not this one.
He did. He did. It was another interview.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
A little inconsistent.
Yeah. I think, if I remember correctly, it might have been another Joe Rogan interview. This is like his third time on there. So if you want, there's like literally 9 hours of Dave talking to Joe. And very little Van Halen in that, by the way. The one DJ or host, I could say, who ever kept Dave on point with talking about Van Halen is Opie and Anthony. If you look up his interview with Opie and Anthony, I've played some clips from it, it is way, way more on point than this. There was hardly any, Van Halen in there, but it was just interesting. He talks about he's had 3 surgeries to his back, and he says there's a lot of wear and tear on my brake pads. He says I've been bouncing around since I'm a teenager. He says he takes chess lessons and guitar lessons every week. So that's kind of interesting. He talks about Mick Jagger and Bruce Springsteen. This I thought was interesting. He said it's important for him to know that they're still out there doing their thing, because then maybe I can too. He says it's not like I'm going to, listen to the new Bruce album, but I'm happy he made it. I guess those guys are older than him, and I guess if they're still going, I guess it makes him feel better. He calls himself not a healthy guy. He says he doesn't really eat meat, but he says he has he lives on like oatmeal, rice, beans, and a lot of like poultry and stuff like that. He says he's the same size that he was since college. Not many people can say that. He said his uncle lived to 96, and he's hoping to live that long, just like his uncle. And he said that Van Halen's audience is all across the board. He said it's really people on the left and people on the right. He says that there was a lot of work that was put into Van Halen. He said the genius of Van Halen is in the composition. We did our 10,000 hours before we even made our first album, which is incredible. When Joe Rogan asked him, when did you realize that you had something? He said, right away. There was no development period for us, which was interesting. He said he also listens mainly to Sirius XM in terms of music, and the music he listens to, bluegrass, Outlaw Nation, Rock the Bells. This was a little weird. He says, we never took around a demo tape. Talk about Van Halen. We made the assertion that if we are as good as we think we are, we'll get discovered. And if we don't get discovered, it's because we suck. But that's not true. They made a demo tape. So what the fuck is he talking about?
Well, that Gene Simmons wanted them to make a demo tape. But that story is not inconsistent with what I've heard or read before. They were determined to gig and play live and get noticed that way.
Yeah.
They were not going to be the band that had a demo tape and was going to shop it around to every record company on the face of the planet. So that doesn't surprise. They just happened to have the one from Gene, and they weren't all happy with the one from Gene either.
They weren't.
If they used that one.
It was mainly to get ideas down. I mean, that was mainly, Ted knew they had the bones. Like they had the performance, they had the musicianship, they had the songs. But, Ted and Don were like, all right, the quality is there. We just got to work it. We got to make it sound good. That's what it was. So that's for sure. He also talked about how he ran his lyrics through Alex's brain before it was approved. That I've never heard before. He said in writing lyrics, he likes to use a lot of verbs. Running with the devil, or jump, or dance the night away. He says, what does it sound like to jump, to run, or to dance, which is kind of interesting. And he also talked about that whole thing about his family, about his main goal was contribution. What contribution have you made? And then he went into very detailed